the vehicle with more than 600,000 units produced in the few years of the war, the one that carried Allied soldiers around, climbed over obstacles, rushed to the back with wounded, transported ordinary soldiers and generals, the icon of World War II. Most people can even recall its iconic sound, the Jeep. You would think a vehicle so common and simple have a short history, but you'd be wrong. The Jeep's origins and history until it became what it is a longer one. So without wasting any more time, let's jump in. The US Army after the First World War started looking for lightweight and low silhouette vehicles to motorize the troops and replace the motorcycles and other vehicles. They were looking for something versatile that is capable of reconnaissance but could also carry some weaponry. However, the budget cuts after World War I slowed down these developments and they only sped up again in the late 1930s. Over the years, the army experimented with several converted vehicles. There were some quite unique ideas, like the Wwii machine gun carrier in 1937, but no real solution came forward before the start of World War II. Though by 1938 the army had half-ton 4x4 trucks, such as the Wwii, which had good off-road performance, they were still too heavy and big for quick reconnaissance missions, and they weren't nimble enough off-road, so the search for the small light vehicle continued. After the war broke out in Europe, things suddenly sped up for the army. On 11th of July 1940, the army set up requirement for a quarter-ton 4x4 truck and sent it to US car manufacturers. The specification asked for, quote, general-purpose personal or cargo carrier especially adaptable for reconnaissance or command and designated as quarter-ton 4x4 truck, unquote. The army was so much in a hurry that the requirements were very demanding. The car manufacturers had to enter their bids by 22nd of July, just 11 days after they received the requirements. After this they had 49 days to present the first prototype and 75 days to finish 70 test vehicles. The technical specifications were very narrow as well. The vehicle must feature a 4x4 drivetrain, a wheelbase not more than 80 inches, and a maximum height of 40 inches with folded down windshield. It had to be able to carry 660 pounds of payload and weight no more than 1300 pounds. Because of the very strict requirements, only two manufacturers entered the competition, American Bantam and Willys Overland. The price from Willys was lower, but they required more time to finish a prototype, so American Bantam received the contract. Bantam brought in freelance engineer Carl Probst, who laid out the plans for the vehicle in just 2 days and worked out the cost of manufacture the next day, and Bantam submitted their bid on 22nd of July. The vehicle incorporated many off-the-shelf automotive parts, which helped a lot to meet the very narrow time frame. The first hand-built prototype, the Blitz Buggy or Old Number 1, was delivered to the Army Test Center on 23rd of September 1940. It met all the requirements, except the original weight limit and the engine torque. Though American Bantam won the contract, it was realized as a small company they won't have the capacity to meet the amount of vehicles the army will need. Willys and Ford were brought in to complete their prototypes. The Bantam blueprints were shared with them and their engineers were invited to the Bantam prototype testing. Both companies presented their own prototypes by November, and their testing began together with Bantam's BRC-60 vehicles. The Willys Quad was basically a copy of the Bantam prototype, while the Ford Pygmy showed some differences. It was the first example of the headlight moved inside the body to be more protected. The weight limit was raised to 2,160 pounds, as none of the vehicles could meet the original 1,300 pounds limit. By the time testing was concluded in the end of 1940, the army were in even more of a hurry, in the looming shadow of the war. The European allies were also very interested in acquiring these vehicles, so all 3 vehicles were accepted and 1,500 units of each were ordered. By 1941 the Jeep was in mass production. Bantam and Ford started rolling out the vehicles in March and Willys in June. The first production runs were relatively small numbers, the Bantam BRC-40 with 2,605 units, the Ford GP with 4,456 and the Willys MA with 1,553 manufactured before in July 1941 the War Department decided they need to standardize the whole production for these vehicles. Almost all of these early production models were supplied to the UK and Soviet Union through Lend-Lease. Willys win out in the standardization process as their engine was the most powerful and their manufacturing cost was the lowest. The Willys MB was born incorporating the best bits of the 3 designs, most notable the front end of the Ford GP with the flat grille and the headlights under the hood. The standardized Jeep ended up with Willys' 2.2-liter Go Devil engine producing 60 horsepower, driving a 3-speed manual transmission. Its top speed was 65 miles an hour on road, 25 miles an hour off-road. It had a maximum range of 285 miles and weighted 2,293 pounds. As the need for the Jeeps were so high, Willys couldn't keep up with the orders, so in October 1941, Ford also received a contract to build the vehicles on license, including the Willys engine. Initially, Ford offered to increase the output of their own engine, but the government declined it as they wanted full interchangeability. Ford had to build a complete manufacturing line for the Willys engine, but they managed to do that in record speed, and the first Ford GPW rolled out in January 1942. The W in the name stands for Willys. By the time the war ended, Willys produced more than 363,000 units, and Ford around 280,000. Bantam, the original company behind the Jeep concept, stopped producing them after the first batch in 1941, though they kept manufacturing trailers for the Jeeps. Unlike other military vehicles with many different setups and variations, the Jeeps were all the same when they left the factory. They were modified with add-on accessories, field kits and local field modifications to fit the roles they are needed for. As expected, being a military vehicle, the most numerous were the various gun placements on them. Between the countless field kits, there were ambulance racks, baggage racks, off-road modifications, waterproofing kits for landings. They were equipped with radios or used to tow equipment. Amongst the local field modifications were the widely known wire cutters, mostly used in the European theatre, various armor plating installations. Some Jeeps were even modified to run on rails. During the war, there were many factory experiments to further develop the Jeep, but most of these didn't go to production. In 1942, tests were run to install the 37mm anti-tank gun on the Jeep, but operating the gun proved to be difficult on the small vehicle, and it couldn't carry enough ammo either. This led to the building of special stretched 6-wheel drive versions featuring the 37mm gun called T13 and T14 models. These vehicles performed well in the tests, but by the time they were finished, the M6 gun motor carriage based on the 3/4-ton Dodge truck has been standardized. The longer 6-wheel drive chassis was not abandoned, it was tested in various roles as cargo or personal carrier, but even though its performance was very good, it was not needed as the same roles could be performed by the existing Dodge trucks. Another interesting experiment was a Jeep-based armored car, the T-24 Scout, built in 1942 on the same, longer 6-wheel drive chassis, but eventually it was dropped for the purpose-built M8 and M20 armored cars. I have already made a video on these armored cars, check the link in the description or at the end of this video. Ford had an interesting experiment which eventually made it into production. They developed the amphibious GPA version, which we will look at in a separate video in the future. The Jeep served in every theatre of World War II, and it was used by all Allied countries. Britain, Canada, the Soviet Union, India, Australia, China all used Jeeps. About 150,000 units were delivered to the UK and 50,000 to the Soviet Union through Lend-Lease. The British used them by great effect in North Africa, not just as scouts or utility vehicles, but in bigger groups as a quick raiding force attacking German supply lines. They were used by every US branch in every theatre from Europe to the Pacific, in many roles, from post carrier to scouting, carrying wounded, to be used as a weapons platform. They were rugged, dependable, nimble and could be adapted to almost any role. The troops liked the Jeep. It wasn't comfortable, but it was dependable, and they knew they can count on it to go where it needed to go and to do what needed to be done. The Jeep remained in service after the war and was used in the Korean and even in Vietnam Wars. In Korea, mostly the modernized M38 and M38A1 versions were used. By the time the Vietnam War broke out, Ford designed a much more modern replacement for the Jeep, the M151, which featured independent suspension and a unibody construction. This vehicle stayed in service up until 1990. The Jeep's legacy lives on in the civil life as well. Willys immediately after the war started marketing and selling their CJ, civilian Jeep models, which over the years grew more civilized but still carrying the legacy of the old World War II mule. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like and in the comments let me know if there's any interesting events or vehicles you'd like to see.